Coming up on the Razzball Fantasy Football Podcast, we discuss the matchups, the top matchups for the wide receivers in Week 7. And how we do that, folks, we have the slot first wide points per game allowed tool on Razzball.com for free. If you go to Razzball.com, we tell you where each defense allows slot fantasy points and out wide and how you can take advantage of that in your fantasy lineups. On today's show, we break down the top matchups starting right now on the Razzball Fantasy YouTube channel. And as always, to help me do that, I have Ben Wasley from overseas coming in live. Follow him at Fantasy First Down No on Twitter. What's going on, Ben?
Look, if you can feel the tension in the room, it's because Bobby and I are facing off in a league this week, and he just dropped 30 on me with Kirk and Olave. Last night, your time, yeah?
Yeah, man. Yeah.
So, the tension is palpable.
I got to tell you, the Michael Thomas play, I liked it. It was a good play. Wide receiver 3 this week. Really solid production. Got in the end zone for you. I like that.
Yeah,
honestly, just because I care about our Friday show and I care about our friendship, I was like, I want to see him do well. I want him to see him do so well but lose at the same time. So I want all your calls to go well, and I want you to do very good this week points-wise, but fall just short of my points.
Top 2 scoring teams this week?
Exactly. Yeah. That's all I ask for, folks. Yeah. As long as you're number 2, I'll be happy, all right? But honestly, man, that'll be a fun matchup this week. Yeah, that's a fun league. The Fantasy Gridiron, go check it out on Instagram. Really fun. Good accounts, very competitive league. Every single year, I feel like I'm either at first or last. This is how it works. I don't go anywhere in the middle.
I'm the other way around. I've never won, but I've never missed the playoffs either. But this year, it's not looking good.
Yeah, I hear you, man. Well, that's all right. You know what? That's why we play into like 8 leagues or 12 leagues or whatever 100 leagues you're in. So you're bound to win one, right? Yeah, 25, whatever. Well, today's show, man, we're, of course, going to be covering those slot versus wide analysis today. We're going to break down the top matchups for Week 7. So essentially what we do in our show is, if you didn't see the intros, we break down the top slot and out wide matchups using our tool on Razzball.com. Now, today's show is going to be a little different. We're actually trying to identify some maybe guys who aren't performing as wide receiver 1s and 2s that you should start this week, and or sleepers to help you set those wide receiver 3, flex spots, especially with all those bye weeks. So we have some notable out wide matchups. Now, if you want to see the top 5 this week, go to Razzball.com, click on the Fantasy Data tab, and you could actually see the points per game broken out, slot versus wide, and also fantasy points scored by receivers. And the best part, too, is, folks, we have rest of season strength of schedules. So it's a great trade tool. If you want to make a trade for a player, check out our wide and slot tool for rest of season. It'll let you know who has the best rest of season schedules. All right, let's get into it. Here's our notable out wide matchup this week. We really like these guys. We have the Arizona Cardinals wide receivers, Marquise Brown and Wilson versus Seattle. We also have Metcalf and Lockett in the same game against the Cardinals. Romeo, Doubs, and Watson against the Broncos. We also have Slayton and Hyatt versus the Commanders. And then we finally wrap up with the Cleveland Browns. Sounds like Watson is a game-time decision, but we have Cooper and Donovan Peoples-Jones as well with one of the better out-wide matchups. So let's get into the first one. Obviously, Marquise Brown has been extremely good this season, and Wilson's popped up for a couple nice games, even with Doubs as his quarterback. So if you look at the metrics right now, Seattle, 8th most points allowed out wide. Some notable out wide performances, Puka Nacua and Atwell. Then you also have Josh Reynolds, DJ Chark, and Jamar Chase all did very well against this team. What's your first reaction about this matchup? Is Marquise Brown in your lineup this week, and are you willing to take a shot on Wilson?
I think in reality, the Seahawks are just guys you can attack no matter whether you're lining up slot or out wide. They're great great in the slot. They're great out wide. That is if you're an opponent, not if you're a Seahawks fan. So I would happily take most good wide receivers playing against them. Marquise Brown is definitely good. He's a solid wide receiver too this week. You probably have to start him, especially because most teams are going to have bye weeks going on. Wilson, on the other hand, I don't feel as confident on. He's had some good weeks, but he's just not reliable to me. He's a desperation option. He's barely inside my top 50.
Yeah, so when I was looking at the numbers, obviously one of the key factors here, notable injury, is Woolen, one of the corners, is actually a little banged up. 6 scores, only 65. That should actually help Marquise Brown, who will see a lot of him on Sunday. Marquise Brown has been okay. Last year against this opponent, against Seattle, had 11.8 PPR points in the one game he faced against them. That's not too bad. Now, Seattle leans an air yard defense. They allow a bunch of air yards, and that's kind of good for Marquise Brown, who's 37th in ADOT, but only 70th in yards after the catch per reception. So I like that being 1-for-1 there. And also, if you look at the way he lines up in the formation, if you look at, he doesn't actually mirror Chase. He doesn't mirror, Puka Nacua, for example. But the good news is that primary matchup with Woolen is where he should line up the most. Now, the other aspect of two is zone versus man. Marquise Brown is better against man, and this is this is a heavy zone team. So might be a little caveat there. But all that being said, Marquise Brown with the 6 bye weeks is a wide receiver 2 for me. I am not stressed about it. He's been too good in tougher matchups to sit him this week. Now, Wilson, I don't think of him as anything more than a DFS dart throw. Now, the good news is that he does have an extremely high ADOT, 10th in the NFL, which means that he could pop off for a long one. I actually don't mind taking a shot at him as a cheap option in DFS if you want to buy down to somebody, but I think Marquise Brown's the one guy in redraft that I'm interested in here. All right, let's jump down to number 2, same game, because we like to keep things easy and streamlined. We got DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. Believe it or not, folks, neither of these guys are a top 20 wide receiver in PPR points per game, so I'm not cheating. I'm not even cheating here. Now, yes, you drafted Metcalf especially to be a wide receiver 2. Hasn't happened. Now he gets a Cardinals matchup, though. That was the 11th most fantasy points out wide. But if you look at the early season schedule, it has not been easy for the Seahawks. So 11th is actually very good for them. Now, notable performances for this defense that has allowed Jamar Chase, Brandon Ayuk, Michael Gallup, Isaiah Hodgins, Trenton Irwin, like outside receivers. So clearly something's going on there. What's your thoughts about DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett this week?
Yeah, I think they should get a lot of volume. I think the main caveat here is with Metcalf is whether he's healthy. We don't know whether he's going to play. He presumably will, but we don't know for sure that he's going to play. I think the latest report is that he's got a hip injury added on to his existing other injuries that he's been dealing with. He's really banged up at the moment. So whether he plays through the hip, we don't know. I think he probably will, but the fact that the game's in the second window makes it a little bit tricky. If all your other wide receiver options are playing in the first window, I'd still start him unless we hear something on Sunday morning that suggests we shouldn't. For me, he's a very high wide receiver 2. Borderline wide receiver 1. It's just that that injury has me a little bit sketchy. And Lockett, this is the highest I've ranked Lockett all season. I think I've got Lockett ranked as my wide receiver 16, and I haven't had him anywhere near there previously, but there's so many players out due to the bye week and injuries and everything else that these guys just become must-starts, essentially.
So another big injury update is that Antonio Hamilton and Thompson, the safety, will be out for the Cardinals this week. They have a 6 score of 77, which we talk a lot about Sports Injury Central. That's their defensive pass grade. Most defenses that are healthier are in the low 90s. So they're playing a defense that's already allowing a bunch of fantasy points, now dealing with injuries. Now, the Cardinals are an air yards defense, which is fantastic for both these guys. DK Metcalf is 16th in average depth of target. Lockett's 38th. They're both outside the top 50 in yards after the catch. So they have to get it done through the air. The good news is that's the kind of matchup we see here. Now, if you look at where they line up, Metcalf kind of mirrors a little bit, and I love to say this, Isaiah Hodgins type, which is great, but also Brandon Ayuk, who had a monster game against this defense. Now, the Cardinals they lean zone, and Metcalf has been amazing against zone, and Lockett's been fine. So I actually am, after reading all through the tea leaves, I actually think both of them are solid starts, and I actually will say I actually don't mind putting him in my DFS lineup. I just have a feeling that these guys are going to both perform, and Gino's going to have a big week this week. All right, let's jump down to number 3. We got Romeo, Doubs, and Christian Watson officially back in the fold for the Green Bay Packers. The Denver Broncos allow the 10th most fantasy points out wide. Notable performances have been Tyreek Hill, Jacoby Myers, DJ Moore, and Terry McLaurin. What's your thoughts about this matchup specifically? Are you worried about the cornerback play for the Broncos? What's your thoughts here, Ben?
I mean, I think we saw last week that the Broncos are slightly trying to turn things around. They made the Chiefs look pretty mediocre, all things considered. We really expected that to be an explosive game, and most of the Broncos games this season have been, but last season they seemed to turn a bit of a corner, so it's not easy to know whether that was just a one-game situation or whether things are going to get a little bit better for their secondary. I think it was probably just a one-game thing. I still want to be starting Watson in all my leagues. He's a wide receiver 2 region player for me. Though a low wide receiver 2, I think he's got a lot of upside. We just haven't seen him do it yet, so it's harder to rank him any higher than that. Doubs, I mean, after last week, it's really hard to rely on him, but to me, he's still a borderline wide receiver 3. We've seen what he can do when everything's going well. Up until last week, he'd had 25 targets in the previous 2 weeks. So it's hard to see Watson coming in and totally shutting Doubs out of the game. It's not like he's a massive possession receiver. So I feel like Doubs is still a borderline start given how many other players you're likely to have out.
Yeah, when I was looking through this information, the first thing that stands out is Watson's ADOT and his yards after the catch are kind of absurd because he's played limited games and he had a couple big catches that he not only has good air yards, he's first in air yards, 10th in air yards, and okay. I'm not even reading the right thing. I'm sorry, everybody. Just give me 1 second. It's Friday afternoon. I'm out of it. Anyway, the Broncos are good either way. They are first in yards after the catch per reception and 10th in air yards allowed. So this is a win-win here, folks. Now, if you look at Christian Watson, he's third in ADOT and he's first in yards after the catch per reception, which is a recipe that you want, by the way. That means he's going to be good no matter what. Yeah, Doubs is a little more conservative, 55th in ADOT and 95th in yards after the catch per reception. So when I'm looking at this stuff, the other thing is what I wanted to look at was where they line up, and I think that's going to be important. I don't think one of the things I did notice is that the Broncos, one of the things they did differently was they played a little more zone against the Chiefs because of all the issues in the secondary. And how does that impact guys like Watson? Well, the good news is then you got Surtain who won't be shadowing you or following you all over the field. So that's good news if they do end up staying in zone because then you'll have better matchups for those other guys. Watson lines up similar to Jacoby Myers, McLaurin, and Hill, which is awesome. Right there. Those guys all went off against them. And if you look at both these guys, they've been better against zone, according to PFF grades. So I'm leaning Watson in as a wide receiver 2. Doubs, I think, is more of a wide receiver 3 play based on the numbers. But I think Christian Watson deserves to be in some DFS lineups this week because he hasn't really given you that. He's on a high price point this season. All right.
The upside, the ceiling's high.
Yes. So Darius Slayton and Jalin Hyatt versus the Commanders. And so as a Giants fan, I temper expectations of how excited I should be. But the Commanders have been fantastic, especially for top wide receivers on the outside. They've allowed the 6th most fantasy points to outside receivers. Here's the list of guys who have basically scored wide receiver 1 numbers against them. DJ Moore, AJ Brown, Drake London, Brandon Johnson, folks. Yeah, Marvin Mims, Stephon Diggs, Devonta Smith. Yeah, that's a long list of guys who have at least had 14 PPR points against this team. So, yeah, what's your thoughts here about these guys? You will take a shot at either of them.
Look, it's just so hard to trust them. We don't know what's going to be happening with the Giants at quarterback. If it's Tyrod Taylor, I mean, eek. If it's Daniel Jones, it's not that much better. So it's kind of hard to know exactly what they're going to be getting. But it is a really good matchup, and there is some upside here. I still don't want to be starting them in leagues. I know that Hyatt finally started playing starter snaps, and that's fantastic. It's good to see him getting that opportunity. Slayton's been very, very mediocre bust. He's either mediocre or he busts. There's really been nothing in between. So neither of them are guys I feel confident starting. They're both desperation options if you just have no one else that you can turn to and you need to grab someone off waivers.
Well, in a week where there's 6 teams on bye, then there might actually be more of a thing. So
you'd hope so, but I don't know that they are.
Yeah, well, last year against the Commanders, he went 6 for 90 in one game, 5 for 23 in the other. So I get the little bit of a boom bust, and at least he's shown flashes that he can perform against this team. The Commanders allow the 4th most air yards this season. That's important because that's where Slayton and Hyatt, if you look at their ADOTs, they're just insane. So they're very low percentage throws, but if you connect on 1 or 2 of them, you just have a big day. We saw that with Slayton last week as well. So I like that. If you look at lineup percentages, Hyatt kind of mirrors London and Moore, while Slayton mirrors Diggs and Smith. So both of them, it's not just one side that's getting dominated. It's everybody. That's what I like about the Commanders. They're giving. They give out points to everyone all over. Now this defense leans man, which is something that's good. Slayton is better against man this season according to PFF grades. I'm in. Give me Slayton as a wide receiver 3 if you need to start somebody. I like him he is like $3,500 on DFS on DK. Like, I love that play this week. Great DFS dark throw there as well. Hyatt is more of a contrarian play in that same game, but Slayton is consistently getting those 5 to 6 targets, and I think he can get a long one in this matchup. All right, let's jump down to the next one, folks. So Amari Cooper and I guess Donovan Peoples-Jones. I mean, he's been a no-show versus the Colts. But we want to just let you know who's running the most routes out wide. The Indianapolis Colts allow the 7th most fantasy points out wide this season. Notable performances include Puka Nacua, Nico Collins, Calvin Ridley, DeAndre Hopkins, Tank Dell, and Zay Jones. What's your thoughts about this matchup here? Are you willing to start Amari Cooper? Maybe take a DFS start throw on Donovan Peoples-Jones.
Look, Amari Cooper, I'm starting, even though we don't really know who's going to be at quarterback. We expect it to be Deshaun Watson, but it is possible he sits out another week or number of weeks, depending on what happens. We just don't know. Having said that, you've got to start Amari Cooper. We saw what happened last week where we all thought, oh, well, PJ Walker's in there. You can't start Amari Cooper, and he goes for over 100 yards. So he's just always got that in his locker, especially in a really good matchup against the Colts. I definitely want to start Cooper, and I'm not starting anyone else, especially given Elijah Moore's going to get Kenny Moore a lot of the time. I tend to be avoiding him, and Donovan Peoples-Jones has just been a total no-show this year. I just don't see any situation where you want to be anywhere near him, even in DFS.
So, when I'm looking at first of all, the Colts have just been getting crushed vertically. And so when I was looking at this, I'm like, oh, wow. When I start the process, I'm like, air yards. First, most air yards allowed this season. Okay. So I'm like, all right, Donovan Peoples-Jones. That's going to probably be him. Honestly, surprisingly, Amari Cooper leads the team in ADOT. Right there, you had me at hello. You had me at ADOT, Amari. It was a beautiful moment for me. And I was like, okay, yeah. Ooh, nice. Serenade me. Okay. I was going to start dancing. So when I look at that, you look at his lineup percentages, these guys are kind of all over the place, but he kind of mirrors Calvin Ridley, who had a good game the first week against this Colts secondary. Now, the one thing I'll talk a lot about is man versus zone. The team that runs the most zone in the NFL is the Colts. They are a very heavy zone team. Now, Cooper has been better against man according to PFF this season, but I do not care. I love the air yards matchup. I think Watson should be back this week. He is a game-time decision. But P.J. Walker last week against San Francisco in the rain. By the way, Brock Purdy could not throw the ball. He outproduced Brandon Ayuk last week, Amari Cooper, with P.J. Walker against San Francisco. I am not scared away. Start him in the dome. Amari Cooper, wide receiver 2. All right, let's go check the comments before we jump down into the next one here. Oh, we got Chill Channel jumping on. Great call on Christian Kirk, Bobby. Thank you. I appreciate that, man. Honestly, last week was a little rough with Jerry Jeudy. This week we bounced back with Christian Kirk. I get a little hesitant on Thursday night, but I'm glad that Christian Kirk worked out. We got Jamie on the program. Jamie, always a pleasure, sir. What's going on, man? He asked, Michael Wilson's going to eat this game. I like the call. We have him in there as an option in DFS, but we are leaning Marquise Brown as a regular starter there, but I don't know if we're going to be in there as well. Before we jump down, we do have a question here. KJ Frederick, Zach Evans, looks like a start-sit. And by the way, speaking of start-sit, KJ, we have a start-sit show every Sunday live for 2 hours before kickoff from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. PST. 2 hours where we answer all your start-sit questions. We do weather updates, injury updates, everything you need up until kickoff. Join us every Sunday live on the Rasball Fantasy YouTube channel. But we'll answer this question right now. We have Zach Evans, Latavius Murray, or Jordan Mason. What's your thought? Full PPR, Ben.
Well, there's a couple of things to state about this. Firstly, Zach Evans, we don't know if he's going to be the starter. He's probably going to be the starter, but they've got Royce Freeman. They've got Myles Gaskin, bizarrely. They've got Darrell Henderson, who'll probably do some blocking for them. Realistically, it's going to be a bit of a mess. I suspect they're going to throw a lot, but Evans is probably the guy to start if you're starting someone in that game. Murray's been really busy when the Bills have been in close games or playing from behind. I don't expect this to be a close game, and I don't expect them to be playing from behind. So I think this is probably more of a James Cook game, and I'd generally be avoiding Murray. Now, he might get in the end zone. He's been doing that a fair bit, but we've seen the last couple of weeks that Cook's been getting a lot more goal line looks. So I'd expect that I'd prefer Cook as the start over what we'd usually expect compared to Murray. I'd probably avoid Murray this week. Jordan Mason, man, we have no idea what's happening in San Francisco. Maybe CMC plays, and if he doesn't, you should have expected it was going to be Elijah Mitchell, but it wasn't last week, which makes it a little bit of an unknown whether Mitchell's going to be healthier and he's going to start, or does Mason start? All of those question marks make me really sketchy around that as well. For that reason, I'd probably go towards Zach Evans. We've never really seen him take on a full workload, even in college, but he's still the better option because I think the volume is more likely to be there than with the other two guys.
So I actually am, when I'm looking at the situation, I actually am not trusting Zach Evans. I'm out. I'm a Darrell Henderson guy this week. If I'm going to put a flag plan on a Rams running back, that's my hot take. I'm not going to start anything.
It's very hard.
It is. Darrell Henderson a year ago was a foundational runner for the Rams. It wasn't 3 years ago, wasn't 5 years ago, last season. Like, he was the guy while Cam Akers was in the doghouse. So it's not like Darrell Henderson's been away from the team for a few years. It's basically been a calendar year. The other aspect is Sean McVay said in his interview when he was talking about the running backs, they were talking about Zach Evans. The first thing he said was, yeah, that's maybe not going to be the case. When he was asked if he's going to be the main guy, he said, we have a bunch of guys. Immediately diverts to other things. And then he says, I know that Darrell Henderson will stick his nose in pass pro. As soon as I heard that, I thought, he went out of his way. He skipped over Royce Freeman, who's been in the system for a few weeks. He skipped over Evans. He went right to Darrell Henderson. And what's the most important thing you got to do? You got to protect Matthew Stafford. He's going to be in the game obnoxious amount. So I would say Henderson would be the guy I want. Mason, we're not going to know. If you find out that on Saturday morning, for whatever reason, we find out that CMC's ruled out, I would say just go Mason. I think he's going to split with Elijah Mitchell. That'd be great. But if it's Sunday morning, we do not know if CMC has not been ruled out, I'm going Lat Murray. I think he's the safest bet. New England run defense is good, but I just think he's the guy I feel like I know will at least be on the damn field the most. That's how I feel confident. So I'm going to go Lat Murray here over Zach Evans. I just don't have any faith there that he's going to get all the work. All right, let's jump down to our next section. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the notable slot matchups. So these are the guys that play in the middle of the field. We only got two this week. We have Rashee Rice versus the Chargers, and we also have Curtis Samuel versus my Giants. Let's talk about Rashee Rice first here, Ben. Now, if you look at the Chargers, they allow the 8th most fantasy points to the slot, but they get beat everywhere. Slot, out wide. But the uncertainty out wide has allowed Rashee Rice to really emerge. We have notable performances from guys who play in the slot, CeeDee Lamb, of course, but then also guys like KJ Osborne and Nick Westbrook-Akine had double-digit fantasy points against this defense. So what's your thoughts about Rashee Rice this week? Are you giving him a shot in your lineups?
It's a really weird situation where we went into the season thinking, Sky Moore's going to be the slot guy, right? Like, he'll probably be the slot guy. He's the only one of the Chiefs at the moment that's playing that has more than 50% of his fantasy points coming out wide. Everyone else is getting all their points in the slot. It makes absolutely no sense at all. Having said that, one thing we can see is Rashee Rice is really slowly starting to emerge. When he's been playing on limited snaps, he's been very effective, and his snaps are slowly starting to rise. He's up to about 50% at the moment. You'd expect that will hopefully continue to rise as the season goes on, especially because at the moment we're seeing the Chiefs are a little bit more banged up in their wide receiver room. So Rice is a guy I'm interested in. He's someone I see as, a very low-end wide receiver 3 option. I like the matchup. I like the upside. I like the fact that he's getting a lot of targets when he's on the field. I feel like there's enough there, especially with his possible red zone looks as well, where he kind of is the guy, the wide receiver that I want from the Chiefs. Now, do I want any of them? Well, not really, but if I'm going to take one of them and it is a good matchup, then Rice is definitely the guy I'd take because I do expect him to be active and effective out of the slot when he's on the field.
Yeah, I'm going to start off with, I think he's wide receiver 3 approved. I'm going to start in the back, then go work my way up. He's wide receiver 3 approved because the one thing I did notice is, yes, he's a yards after the catch guy. He doesn't get a lot of air yards, and that's where the Chargers get beat is vertically. They actually only allow 25th most yards after the catch this season versus they are one of the top 10 in air yards. So that's one downside. However, they play a ton of zone. And so when I was looking at this, surprisingly, Rashee Rice is not only good at beating zone, he's elite. So like PFF, you see their grades, they have blue. Blue means like you're the best of the best. Rashee Rice is in blue against zone.
You want to be blue.
Yeah, that's when you know you're doing something right, folks. So Rashee Rice, because I like the fact he's going to he's starting to get more work. Also, Justin Watson is injured and not playing. We'll see what the Mecole Hardman role is this week, but I like Rice in this matchup. Let's jump down to another one. Curtis Samuel. Surprisingly, I think at this point we could all agree is the number 2 wide receiver for the Commanders. Sorry, Jahan Dotson. It is what it is. It doesn't look good for you. The Giants allow the 4th most fantasy points to the slot, and they've only faced one notable slot guy, and it was CeeDee Lamb, who performed very well against them. So what's your thoughts here about Curtis Samuel? Are you feeling him in PPR leagues this week? Is he actually the wide receiver 2 for the Commanders?
I mean, to me, he is. I don't understand why he is. It doesn't make any sense. He's not the second most talented. I love Jahan Dotson. He's a first rounder. I don't understand why they're not using him better. But clearly, Curtis Samuel is the guy that they want to use, and he's just getting a whole lot of targets. He had, 17 receptions in the last 3 weeks. He's had a touchdown in every single game. He's averaging over 50 yards a game in the last 4 games. In fact, he's only had one game where he didn't get at least 40 yards. So he has a bit of a flaw there. And that's pretty good for a guy that you probably picked up off waivers in the last week or two. He's not someone you expected to get involved. He might even be available in your league. And realistically, I've got him probably as a wide receiver 3 this week. He's right on that borderline. There's a few players we've talked about on that borderline. But for me, he's a guy I feel pretty good about. In PPR, I feel even better because we know that you can attack the Giants through the slot. So I kind of like his chances in this game. Now, we've seen in the past with the Commanders, they do tend to change around who gets the targets. We saw a big Logan Thomas game. We've seen a big Terry McLaurin game. We haven't really seen a big Curtis Samuel game. Wouldn't surprise me if it comes this week. He's even someone you could start in DFS if you wanted to.
I got to tell you, Logan Thomas really hurt my feelings last week.
Yeah.
Like I was genuinely, we talked about it on Friday. We were both in, and somehow like they scored 3 touchdowns through the air, throws for 150 yards though. And then Logan Thomas just doesn't play. And it made me very sad. I had to actually go out and make a trade for a tight end because I was done. He broke me. I was done with the streaming. I had to trade a running back. It was a whole fig. But anyway, let's talk about Curtis Samuel. All right, so I'll make this really quick. So when you hear my stats, I talk about yards for the catch, all that stuff. Here's what I was looking through Curtis Samuel. First of all, the matchup's great. We talked about this, so why we're highlighting. The Giants allowed the 5th most yak this season. Curtis Samuel dominates after the catch. That's where he gets his fantasy points. The Giants run a boatload of zone this season. Giants run heavy man this season, and Samuel is good against man coverage. He's wide receiver 3 approved for me. I like it. When all the things line up, 2 + 2 = 4. You just say thank you. I like it nice and easy. No complicated equations here, folks. All right, let's jump down to the notable out-wide downgrades. Unfortunately, we can't always be positive. Even the pup's upset. The pup knows that this is a downgrade, folks. So the downgrades are Mike Evans and Chris Godwin against the Falcons. We have Pittman and Pierce versus the Browns. We have Johnson and Pickens going up against the Rams. So these are 3 matchups that are, these are really good receivers, and they are potential sits this week. But let's dive into the numbers here. Let's first cover Evans and Godwin against the Falcons. So the Falcons this season are 31st in fantasy points allowed out wide. Some notable performances against them: Jaden Reed, Amon-Ra, St. Brown, Christian Kirk. All of them played well, but they were mainly in the slot. Then you have Curtis Samuel, another slot guy. Terry McLaurin's the one outlier of a good outside receiver who actually put up points against the Falcons. But for the most part, all the guys who had really good performances were in the slot. So what's your thoughts here, Ben? Are you fading Evans and Godwin this week?
It's really tough to know what to do with these guys. With Evans, I've tried really, really hard to drop him down my rankings. I don't want him ranked as high as I've got him. Currently, I've got him ranked as the wide receiver 11, and I hate it. I'm so annoyed. I want him to be lower. It's a bad matchup, but he's Mike Evans, and he just seems to have these big games even when you don't expect it. He's so capable of getting touchdowns. He's so capable of making big plays. He seems to be able to beat any corner. But he does also have these really big bust games. So I'm really nervous this is going to be one of these bust games. I just can't avoid starting him, though. He's so good, and he has such big performances sometimes that you're always going to regret it if you don't have him in your lineups. He's someone who can win you a week by himself. And even if he doesn't go off, he's not losing you a week just because he's unproductive. You're always going to have a couple of players who don't do very much. So I really need to be starting that upside. Chris Godwin's the weird one. I expected him to be involved in the slot a lot more. And if he was, this would make this a really good matchup for him. But he hasn't been. He's been out wide a lot of the time, and that makes him more of a wide receiver 3 for me. If he was playing the slot a lot more, then I'd be very happy to start him as a wide receiver 2. But he's the guy I'm really fading this week just because I don't think there's the same amount of upside as there is with Evans.
So last season when they played together against the Falcons, they had the exact same amount of PPR points, 12.1. So I kind of view them both as wide receiver 3s this week. I don't think Evans is a must start. He's a wide receiver 3. I think same thing with Chris Godwin. So when you look at the numbers, first of all, the Falcons are 23rd in air yards, 31st in yards after the catch, so that you can get a little bit of air yards, but overall you're not getting much against this Falcons secondary. Evans lines up similar to McLaurin, who's the only guy who's done well. So there is something there, but A.J. Terrell could shadow Mike Evans on the outside. We're not sure, but that is an option there because they do play a little more man than most defenses, so that could be a factor there. Chris Godwin's been elite, by the way. One of the blue guys against man, according to PFF. Meanwhile, Mike Evans hasn't been too good against man. So that's something notable. So that's why overall, I am not all in on either guy. I think I'm going to hedge a little bit here and call each a wide receiver 3. But I lean Mike Evans, of course, because of what he's produced this season. All right, let's jump down to number 2. It's Michael Pittman and I guess Pierce. We're just trying to be nice here. It's a charity organization here, just offering up additional shout outs. But the Browns have been awesome this season. They're 32nd in the NFL in fantasy points allowed out wide. Notable performances against the Browns is blank because there's no one that's performed well against this Browns team. Is Michael Pittman a sit this week? What's your thoughts, Ben?
Look, I mean, firstly, Alec Pierce, he exists. He's an NFL player, and he's better at football than I'll probably be at anything. So respect to him, but he shouldn't be in your fantasy teams. Michael Pittman, on the other hand, I'm not even sure that he should be in your fantasy teams either. Certainly not in your starting lineups this week. I'm really concerned about anyone playing against the Browns. It's a scary, scary matchup. And we know that Michael Pittman is not an every week starter. He's good in good matchups, but we saw what he did against the Rams. 1 reception for 15 yards. That's not good enough. He's had some really good matchups for most of the season, and he's done well when he's had them, but he has tended to be a little bit better up until last week with Anthony Richardson compared to Gardner Minshew. I don't know that he's necessarily going to get those targets with Minshew. Minshew's gone to downs a lot more. Plus, I think they're probably just going to want to really shorten the game and run the ball a whole heap against the Browns. And I could see this being a really low-scoring, drudge fest kind of situation there. He's a wide receiver 3 for me. I feel like we've said that 5 or 6 times, but I guess that's why we're talking about these players. He's someone you can start if you have to start him because of the week we're in with 6 bye weeks, but I'm not running out to make sure that I start Michael Pittman. There's some upside there, but there's a really low floor.
So the Browns allow the least amount of yards after the catch this season, and we talked last week. The interesting fact about Michael Pittman is his ADOT is extremely low with Gardner Minshew. I'm out. Sit him. No wide receiver 3. I'm out, folks. Get him on your benches. Come to the Sunday Live show. Yeah, out. Anyway, come to the Sunday Live show with your Pittman questions because we would love to tell you to sit him, but there might be a crazy scenario where you have to play him, and I apologize in advance for that situation. All right, let's go to the last one, folks. We have Pickens. Is Diontae Johnson back this week?
Yeah.
Actually, he is back. Great to hear. They got the Rams. Welcome them in right now. The Rams this season have allowed that's not right at all. Okay. I did not put the right thing in there. Must have skipped that part. I will get you the number where they rank at fantasy points out wide, but so far this season, only 2 players have really had wide receiver 1 type games, and it was Jamar Chase and AJ Brown. Some really stud receivers. What's your thoughts this week about Pickens and Johnson coming back against this Rams secondary?
Yeah, look, the Rams are surprisingly good in the secondary. It's not something we expected going into the season, but they've conceded, I think it's the 6th least points out wide or something along those lines. I'm sure Bobby will confirm it in a sec. I'm
6
very
is
wary.
Correct. Look at you.
Go.
I'm proud of you, man. Good for you.
Numbers, hey?
6 fewest fantasy points allowed out wide. That's a bonus worthy right there. That's bonus worthy. Good job.
Put it on my tab. So Johnson and Pickens, look, Johnson first week back, I'm very scared of starting him. He's a very low wide receiver 3 simply because he does tend to get a whole lot of targets, and in something like PPR, that can really help you. But first week back, I have no idea what to expect. You'd be starting him if you're in that situation where you really don't have any other options because everyone else is on bye and he just happens to be on your roster. Can't leave him on IR anymore. Need to put him in because ultimately, if you have to drop him, someone else will definitely pick him up and he's going to get better as the season goes on. Pickens, on the other hand, I mean, he's been pretty good of late, but with Johnson coming back in, I feel like we really need to drop him down a lot. He had a massive boom game, 127 yards and a touchdown against Cleveland. We just talked about how good Cleveland is against out wide receivers. So that was a bit out of nowhere. It's possible he pulls something off against the Rams, but the floor's pretty low. He's kind of a mid-wide receiver 3. Start him if you absolutely have to, but I don't feel good about any of these guys, and neither should you.
Yeah, I don't think I'm going to rush to start Diontae the first week back. But when I was looking at the numbers, George Pickens kind of mirrors a little. He's like a poor man's version of AJ Brown. His yards, he's a little bit more air yards oriented, same thing as AJ Brown, but he's also pretty good after the catch. His lineup percentages mirror AJ Brown, the way he's moved around the formation. And the one thing I noticed with the Rams, they're very zone heavy. So they do play a lot of zone. And Pickens has been better versus man, but he's good against both. So when I was looking through everything, I'm like, you know what? I'm still, and with the 6 buys, he's definitely going to be a top 30-ish wide receiver. So I'm not fading Pickens at all this week. I'm okay with him. Johnson, on the other hand, I do think he's a little more volume dependent, and I want to see more consistency between him and Kenny Pickett getting that volume, because it hasn't been it's been Ben Roethlisberger, Mitch Trubisky in the past. So I want to see him do that with Kenny Pickett before I just jump him back into my lineup. All right, let's go to the last section here, folks. You know the drill, Ben. So your floor is yours. Weekly streamers and stashes heading into week 7.
Look, it's one of those weeks with bye weeks where you're definitely going to need to be streaming people. I've already been pretty happy with my kicker streamer. I had Blake Groupie pretty high this week as among my kicker streamers, and he went off on Thursday night, so I was happy with that. This week, it's all about the quarterbacks. I like Geno Smith and I like Jordan Love. They've hurt us a bit in the past, but realistically, there's a lot of good quarterbacks on bye, and you're going to have to start these guys. So Jordan Love is a good option. Geno Smith's a good option. They're both top 10 for me. With my wide receiver streamers, we've talked about them already in Rashee Rice, but I also like Rondale Moore, given that we know this is a really good matchup for all the Cardinals wide receivers. Rondale Moore's getting more touches, even as a running back, given we know that James Conner's out. So he's an interesting guy you can use. And my favorite tight end streamer this week was Taysom Hill, but you'd have had to read the article to know that. He went off on Thursday night, and you could have started him if you'd gone and read the article and not waited for the podcast now. So make sure you check out the article every week, because we're going pretty well so far this week.
Honestly, and make sure you follow us across the board, because I tweeted out that he was a tight end 1 this week if you needed a matchup, and it worked out. I only bring up the ones I'm right about. So all the stuff that I'm wrong about, I'm just kidding. I always call myself out. Every article, every single week, I intro the article with all the dumb calls I made, because I am transparent, and I want you to know that honestly, for the most part, we're pretty good. So that's why I'm transparent. Anyway, but that's all we got today, folks. This was the wide receiver matchup preview, the slot versus wide points per game allowed analysis. I want to thank my co-host today, Ben Wasley. Go follow him at Fantasy First Down No O on Twitter. Go follow me at Bobby LaMarco on Twitter. And make sure you follow us across the board. Hit that subscribe button on YouTube. Go follow us on IG and TikTok. And, of course, go to Razzball.com for everything you need to win your fantasy league. Thank you for joining us once again. We are out of here.